Strategic deployment of 10,000 troops by April 2024, a three-phase security architecture to enhance border control and drug interdiction operations. Introduction. In January 2025, the Trump administration unveiled a bold strategy aimed at bolstering national security and immigration control at the U.S. Mexico border. This plan includes a significant military deployment potentially involving up to 10,000 troops as part of a three-phase security architecture designed to enhance border control and drug interdiction operations. Central to this initiative is the deployment of troops, the establishment of new detention facilities, and the reinstitution of strict immigration policies. Phase 1: Initial deployment and infrastructure development. The initial phase of this strategy was set into motion on January 21, 2025, when an Internal Customs and Border Protection (CBP) memo proposed a military surge at the southern border. This memo outlined plans for deploying approximately 10,000 soldiers, building on an earlier commitment to send 1,500 troops. The initial deployment would consist of 1,000 Army personnel and 500 Marines who would provide logistical support and assist in building border barriers. President Trump declared a national emergency on his inauguration day, instructing the Defense Department to support operational control over border activities. The troops' roles were explicitly defined as logistical support rather than direct law enforcement, adhering to federal laws that limit military involvement in civilian policing. The administration emphasized the need for enhanced technology and infrastructure to support CBP's mission, citing a growing concern over illegal immigration and drug trafficking. Phase 2: Expanded detention capacity. In conjunction with the troop deployment, the Trump administration planned to significantly increase the capacity of Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) facilities. This expansion is intended to support the anticipated increase in detainees resulting from a stricter immigration enforcement policy. The administration proposed the construction of 14 new detention centers, each with the capacity to hold up to 1,000 migrants, alongside additional facilities designed to accommodate larger groups. This second phase aims to create a robust infrastructure capable of managing the influx of individuals apprehended at the border. The proposal to convert military bases into holding facilities for migrants awaiting deportation was also part of this broader strategy. The administration's goal is to improve the efficiency of deportation processes while deterring illegal crossings. Phase 3: Reinstitution of strict immigration policies. The final phase of this three-pronged strategy involves the reinstatement of stringent immigration policies. Among these measures is the controversial Remain in Mexico policy, which requires asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their claims are processed. Additionally, the administration announced plans to expedite deportation procedures, minimizing the time individuals spend in detention and increasing the speed of removal for those deemed ineligible for asylum. The State Department's suspension of the refugee resettlement program further complicates the situation, leaving many individuals vulnerable and awaiting entry into the U.S. In a bid to justify these sweeping changes, administration officials argued that prior immigration policies under the Biden administration had created significant risks to public safety and national security. Context and implications. The planned deployment of troops to the U.S. Mexico border is a significant pivot toward the militarization of immigration enforcement. Historically, military involvement at the border has been limited to operational and administrative roles. However, this strategy marks a dramatic escalation in the use of military resources for civil enforcement purposes. Critics of the plan express deep concern over the potential implications for civil liberties and the overarching militarization of border enforcement. Advocacy groups argue that the increased military presence could lead to heightened tensions and confrontations at the border, as well as negative repercussions for immigrants and asylum seekers. Moreover, the proposed measures have sparked intense debates surrounding immigration policy in the United States. Supporters of the strategy contend that it is a necessary response to the challenges posed by illegal immigration and drug trafficking, while opponents argue that it represents an overreach of executive power and a departure from traditional immigration practices. Conclusion: the Trump administration's strategic deployment of troops to the U.S. Mexico border reflects an aggressive approach to immigration enforcement characterized by a three-phase security architecture aimed at enhancing border control and drug interdiction operations. As the situation unfolds, the implications of these measures for both national security and civil liberties will continue to be scrutinized, raising questions about the future of immigration policy in the United States. The integration of military resources in this context marks a crucial moment in the ongoing debate over how to address the complexities of immigration and border security. The deployment of 10,000 troops to the U.S. Mexico border as part of a strategy to enhance border security and drug interdiction operations is a significant development in the context of U.S. immigration policy. This proposed military presence, which can be seen as a response to perceived threats from illegal immigration and drug trafficking, introduces several counterintuitive elements that merit examination. 1. Perception of border security. One might expect that a significant military presence at the border would correlate with an increase in illegal crossings or drug trafficking incidents, leading to a spiral of insecurity. However, the Trump administration's justification for the troop deployment is predicated on the notion that previous administrations' policies had created vulnerabilities in border security. Ironically, data indicated that illegal crossings had reached a 4-year low prior to these developments. Thus, the military buildup could be interpreted as an overreaction to a situation that was in fact improving. 2. Integration of military resources. The deployment of active-duty military personnel to support Customs and Border Protection (CBP) and Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) marks a significant shift in how the U.S. approaches border enforcement. Historically, military involvement has been limited to operational support, not direct law enforcement. The counterintuitive aspect here lies in the potential for military personnel to be tasked with roles that fall outside their traditional scope, potentially leading to operational inefficiencies or conflicts with civil liberties. This shift raises questions about the appropriateness of using military resources in civilian law enforcement arenas, especially when the military is bound by different rules of engagement compared to law enforcement agencies. 3. Infrastructure versus personnel. The proposal includes not only a substantial number of troops but also a push for enhanced technology and infrastructure to support border operations. This dual focus on personnel and infrastructure is counterintuitive because traditionally effective border control has relied more on technology and intelligence than on troop numbers. The emphasis on military personnel may overshadow the critical need for modernized technological solutions that could be more effective in detecting and preventing illegal crossings and drug trafficking. 4. Impact on refugee and asylum processes. The administration's reinstatement of strict immigration policies, including the suspension of the refugee resettlement program and the Remain in Mexico policy, appears to be an effort to deter asylum seekers and migrants. However, this approach runs counter to the U.S. historical commitment to providing refuge to those fleeing persecution. Critics argue that these policies exacerbate humanitarian crises and may lead to increased desperation among migrants, potentially resulting in more dangerous attempts to cross the border. The paradox lies in the fact that while the administration seeks to enhance security, its policies may inadvertently increase risks for vulnerable populations. 5. Public safety justification. The administration's narrative frames the troop deployment as a necessary measure for public safety, claiming that past policies have endangered citizens. This justification is counterintuitive given that the actual crime rates associated with undocumented immigrants have been shown to be lower than those of the native-born population. By framing this situation as a dire public safety threat, the administration risks fostering fear rather than addressing the complex realities of migration and border security, culminating in policies that may not align with the data. 6. Potential for militarization. The proposed military presence raises concerns about the long-term implications of militarizing border enforcement. Critics argue that this could normalize military involvement in civilian matters, which can have broader implications for civil rights and governance. The counterintuitive element here is that while the deployment is framed as a proactive measure to protect the nation, it may ultimately undermine public trust in government institutions and exacerbate tensions between communities and law enforcement. 7. Political capital and public opinion. The deployment strategy coincides with a broader political narrative aimed at galvanizing support among certain voter demographics. However, this approach may alienate moderate voters who are concerned about civil liberties and the humanitarian implications of aggressive border policies. The counterintuitive outcome of this strategy could be a backlash against the administration's hardline stance, as public sentiment may shift towards more humane approaches to immigration. In conclusion, the proposed deployment of 10,000 troops to the U.S. Mexico border reflects a complex interplay of security policy and public perception that introduces several counterintuitive dynamics. The administration's framing of these actions as necessary for national security stands in contrast to existing data regarding immigration trends and public safety. The implications of this militarization extend beyond immediate border enforcement, potentially reshaping the landscape of U.S. immigration policy and civil-military relations for years to come. The report on the strategic deployment of up to 10,000 troops to the U.S. Mexico border under the Trump administration outlines a significant shift in the approach to immigration enforcement and border security. While much of the discussion revolves around the immediate implications of this military presence, several critical aspects are likely to be overlooked by the general public yet hold profound significance for the broader socio-political landscape. 1. Militarization of immigration enforcement. One of the most significant aspects of this report is the militarization of immigration enforcement. The deployment of military personnel to assist with border security represents a departure from traditional practices where military roles were largely limited to logistical and administrative support rather than direct involvement in immigration enforcement. This shift raises concerns about the potential normalization of military involvement in civilian law enforcement activities. Historically, the Posse Comitatus Act limits military involvement in domestic law enforcement. And this development could set a troubling precedent for future administrations. Significance: the implications of this militarization extend beyond immediate border security concerns. It could lead to an erosion of civil liberties and an increased militaristic approach to domestic issues, which may not only affect immigration policies but also how law enforcement interacts with communities across the country. 2. Expansion of detention facilities. The proposal to expand detention capacity significantly through the establishment of 14 new facilities highlights a critical intersection of immigration enforcement and human rights considerations. Each facility is designed to hold up to 1,000 migrants, with additional larger facilities set to accommodate thousands more. This expansion reflects a punitive approach to immigration, focusing on detention rather than pathways to legal status or asylum. Significance: the increase in detention capacity raises questions about the treatment of detainees, the conditions within these facilities, and the broader implications for immigrant rights. It signals a shift toward viewing immigrants as security threats rather than individuals seeking refuge or better opportunities, which can have lasting impacts on societal perceptions of immigrant communities. 3. Political context and public response. The context in which these military deployments and policy shifts are occurring is also crucial. The Trump administration's framing of migration as a national emergency plays into broader narratives of fear and insecurity, potentially influencing public sentiment and political discourse. This narrative is further supported by claims that prior border policies under the Biden administration have jeopardized public safety and national security. Significance: the political framing of immigration issues can heavily influence public opinion and policy directions. By positioning these actions as necessary for national security, the administration may be able to garner support for increasingly aggressive enforcement measures. This strategy can polarize public sentiment and complicate bipartisan efforts to address immigration reform in a humane and effective manner. 4. Legal and ethical considerations. The use of military resources for immigration enforcement raises profound legal and ethical questions. While the administration has justified these measures under the guise of national security, critics argue that they contravene established legal frameworks intended to protect civil liberties and due process rights for immigrants. Significance: the legal ramifications of deploying military personnel in this manner could lead to challenges in court and may set off a broader debate about the interpretation of laws governing military involvement in domestic affairs. Moreover, ethical considerations regarding the treatment of migrants and the moral implications of using military force against vulnerable populations are central to the ongoing discourse about immigration policies. 5. Long-term implications for U.S. immigration policy. The report signals a potential long-term shift in U.S. immigration policy towards a more militarized and restrictive framework. With the reinstatement of policies like Remain in Mexico and the suspension of refugee resettlement programs, the administration's actions may have a lasting impact on the U.S. immigration system. Significance: these changes could lead to the systematic dismantling of protections for asylum seekers and refugees, altering the landscape of U.S. immigration for years to come. The implications for international relations, particularly with neighboring countries in Central America and Mexico, could also be profound, as these policies may exacerbate the conditions that drive migration in the first place. 6. Response from advocacy groups and communities. The military deployment and the associated policies have sparked significant backlash from advocacy groups, local officials, and immigrant communities. Concerns about the humanitarian implications of such actions are central to the opposition narrative. Many advocates argue that a militarized approach to immigration does not address the root causes of migration and instead exacerbates the crises faced by vulnerable populations. Significance: the mobilization of community and advocacy group responses can influence public policy and drive grassroots movements. The potential for organized resistance can play a crucial role in shaping the discourse around immigration and may lead to calls for comprehensive reform that addresses both security concerns and humanitarian needs. Conclusion. In summary, while the report details the planned military deployment to the U.S. Mexico border and associated policy measures, it is essential to recognize the broader implications of these actions. The militarization of immigration enforcement, the expansion of detention facilities, the political framing of immigration issues, and the legal and ethical considerations all contribute to a complex and evolving landscape in U.S. immigration policy. These developments warrant careful scrutiny as they may reshape the future of immigration in the United States and impact the lives of millions of individuals seeking safety and opportunity. The significance of these overlooked elements lies in their potential to influence not only policy but also the societal values and norms surrounding immigration and national security. 1. Militarization of border enforcement. The planned deployment of up to 10,000 troops marks a significant shift in how the U.S. addresses border security and immigration enforcement. The Trump administration's strategy illustrates a transition from traditional roles of military support to a more direct involvement, raising concerns about the implications of using military personnel in civilian law enforcement contexts. This militarization has historical precedents but is unprecedented in its proposed scope, sparking debates regarding civil liberties, the effectiveness of military intervention in domestic issues, and the potential long-term impacts on U.S. immigration policy. 2. Operational role and legal constraints. The deployment will focus on logistical support and infrastructure development rather than direct law enforcement, adhering to federal laws that generally prohibit military engagement in civilian policing. Understanding the legal framework surrounding military involvement in domestic matters is crucial for analyzing the potential consequences of this strategy. This aspect raises questions about the delineation of roles between military and law enforcement agencies, especially regarding accountability and oversight in operations that could affect vulnerable populations such as migrants seeking asylum. 3. Expanded detention and immigration policies, alongside the troop deployment. The Trump administration's strategy involves significant expansions in detention capacity through the construction of new facilities. The increase in detention centers and the reinstatement of strict immigration policies such as the Remain in Mexico policy underscore a broader agenda aimed at fast-tracking deportations and limiting asylum opportunities. This point invites discussion on the humanitarian implications of such policies, their alignment with international human rights standards, and the potential for increased legal challenges based on these changes. For political and social implications, the announcement of troop deployments and stringent immigration measures has provoked a mix of support and opposition, reflecting deep divisions in U.S. society regarding immigration policy. The political context surrounding these developments, including public perception and advocacy responses, highlights the contentious nature of immigration as a political issue. Analyzing the reactions from various stakeholders, including local officials, immigrant advocacy groups, and the general public, provides insight into the broader implications for social cohesion, community relations, and the political landscape heading into the 2024 elections. 1. The deployment of troops to the U.S. Mexico border in 2018. In April 2018, President Donald Trump ordered the deployment of National Guard troops to the U.S. Mexico border to assist with border security amid rising concerns over illegal immigration and drug trafficking. The deployment included about 2,000 troops who were tasked with supporting the Department of Homeland Security (DHS) and the U.S. Border Patrol. The initiative was part of a broader strategy to enhance border security and deter illegal crossings, echoing similar themes of militarization of border enforcement as seen in the proposed plans for 2025. 2. The Operation Jumpstart 2006. Under President George W. Bush, Operation Jumpstart was launched in 2006, where approximately 6,000 National Guard troops were deployed to the U.S. Mexico border. The mission aimed to boost border security amid growing concerns about illegal immigration and drug smuggling. The National Guard troops were instructed to provide support to Border Patrol agents, including surveillance and logistical assistance rather than direct law enforcement actions. This operation marked a significant point in the ongoing militarization of border security efforts in the United States. 3. The U.S. military's role in the war on drugs 1980s to 1990s. During the 1980s and 1990s, the U.S. military played a significant role in the war on drugs, particularly in Latin America. Initiatives like Operation Condor and the establishment of military training programs for foreign governments aimed at combating drug trafficking organizations. The U.S. provided military aid and training to various countries in Central and South America to assist in the fight against drug cartels. This military involvement in drug interdiction operations set a precedent for future deployments and interventions that blurred the lines between military and civilian law enforcement. The strategic deployment of 10,000 troops to the U.S. Mexico border, as outlined by the Trump administration in early 2025, indicates a seismic shift in U.S. immigration policy and border security operations. This militarization approach, framed as a necessary response to illegal immigration and drug trafficking, is set to unfold in 3 phases, with significant implications for both domestic policy and international relations. Phase 1. Immediate troop deployment and infrastructure development by April 2025. The initial phase involves the immediate deployment of 1,500 troops, with plans to escalate this number to 10,000. These troops will provide logistical support and assist in constructing barriers designed to deter illegal crossings. This military presence is expected to bolster the operational capabilities of Customs and Border Protection (CBP) and Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE), enabling them to manage increased migrant detentions effectively. As military bases may be converted into holding facilities for detainees, there will be a surge in border infrastructure development. This could include surveillance technology, advanced communication systems, and enhanced transportation for deportation flights. The justification for this phase centers on public safety and national security, aiming to create a more controlled and secure environment at the southern border. Phase 2, Policy Reinforcement and Legal Framework, mid-2025. Following the initial deployment, the second phase will focus on reinforcing immigration policies that align with the military's presence. The administration is expected to implement stricter immigration laws such as expedited deportation processes and the reinstatement of the Remain in Mexico policy. This phase may also see the suspension of certain humanitarian protections, including the refugee resettlement program, which could lead to a decline in asylum requests. Legal challenges to these policies are anticipated, prompting the administration to strengthen its legal framework to support the military's role in immigration enforcement. The potential for increased civil unrest and opposition from advocacy groups is likely to escalate, raising concerns about human rights violations and the treatment of migrants. Phase 3, Long-Term Strategic Integration and Regional Cooperation, 2026 and beyond. The final phase will involve integrating military operations into a broader national security strategy. This could lead to the establishment of a permanent military presence at the border, fundamentally altering the role of the U.S. military in domestic affairs. Over time, the administration may seek to formalize partnerships with Mexico and Central American nations to address the root causes of migration, such as violence and economic instability. This strategic integration may include collaborative efforts to combat drug trafficking and organized crime across borders, potentially leading to joint military operations or intelligence sharing agreements. However, such collaborations will be contingent upon the political climate in Latin America and the U.S.'s willingness to engage with foreign governments on sensitive issues regarding immigration and security. Future outlook and predictions. 1. Increased militarization of border control. The trend towards greater military involvement in immigration enforcement is likely to continue, setting a precedent for future administrations. This could lead to the normalization of military operations in domestic contexts, raising ethical and legal concerns. 2. Rising tensions and civil disobedience. As enforcement measures intensify, public dissent is expected to grow. Advocacy groups may mobilize protests and legal challenges could emerge, potentially leading to confrontations between law enforcement and civilian activists. 3. Impact on U.S. Mexico relations. The aggressive stance on immigration could strain diplomatic relations with Mexico and Central American countries. Potential backlash from these nations may hinder cooperative efforts to manage migration and drug trafficking. For economic implications, the deployment of troops and expansion of border infrastructure will require substantial financial resources. The economic burden of maintaining a large military presence may prompt debates over budget allocations and priorities, impacting other critical areas such as education and healthcare. 5. Shifts in public opinion. The public's perception of immigration and border security may evolve as the consequences of this strategy become apparent. Increased visibility of military operations and their impact on migrant communities may lead to a re-evaluation of attitudes towards immigration policies. In conclusion, the strategic deployment of troops to the U.S. Mexico border marks a pivotal moment in U.S. immigration policy. The implications of this move will resonate across various dimensions: legal, social, economic, and diplomatic, shaping the future landscape of border control and national security for years to come. As developments unfold, it will be crucial to monitor the responses from civil society, governmental bodies, and international partners to gauge the long-term effects of this militarized approach to immigration enforcement.